Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode 63. We're going to talk a little bit today about tires. So, exciting topic. But before we do any of that, my name is Morgan Hayes, an assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering here at the University of Kentucky, focusing on livestock facilities. My personal life, I farm in Boyle County, Kentucky with my husband. It's a commercial cattle and hay operation.
And I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems Agriculture Engineering as well, where I focus on precision livestock farming. In my personal life, we raise registered Angus cattle, some goats, and also focus on some hay production. A little less this year because we left hay.
A little less hay this year, yeah. It's been a little bit of a tough year, but it's been a pretty busy week since we last chatted, Josh. So give us a little bit of an update about what's been happening on your farm.
We went ahead and we ran the bush hog across some of our pastures. So some of the ones that were getting the ironweed and some of the cockerburr, everything was coming up. So knocked those back. Pretty much whenever I had a group of cows, I'd rotate them, went ahead right behind them and started bush hogging. I could just to knock some of that down so we get a little better regrowth.
Good.
So mechanical control of some of those weeds. Other aspect we worked on was we did run a couple of our calves through, some of our spring calves, ran them through, gave them some of their calf foot vaccination. So staying busy. How about yourself?
I know that we talked a little bit about having some tractor and baler and all kinds of issues. We actually did work on hay binds this week. My husband really did that. I did not do any work on the hay, I'm being 100% honest. And we also are working on a fence, on a perimeter fence with a neighbor. That's been going pretty quickly. My husband's actually trying to get that wire up today, but we got post driven over the weekend for that.
Excellent.
And aside from that, we're rotating animals and we got a lot of hay in. That sounds like a really funny thing, but that's a big deal. We had some hay that was delivered. So we finished filling a barn that was about half full. So that's, we had about 160 bales in that. A lot of money spent to do that, but we do have hay at least in one more barn, which since we talked about it last time, the hay supply is being tight this year. Getting any hay in is a big accomplishment right now. So we're working on just general rotation, management type decisions. And then outside of that, we're really also focused on getting that fence up because we need it up to be able to rotate our cattle back in another couple weeks. So
right. And I guess you're probably like us. We're getting ready to move groups or potentially move herds just because it's almost calving time.
Yeah, we are getting close to calving. Our primary fall group is on a leased piece of land. They're not going to move there. They are where they are. But we actually changed our rotation and moved them into our largest field that has the most woods in it right now in hopes that we get it grazed before they start calving. So that we're going to bring them back into some of the closer pastures on that rotation when we think calving is starting. So Fingers crossed that was the right decision and they don't drop early out in the big field. But I'm thinking we have about another week in the big field and then they're coming back into some fields that are a little bit more manageable for checks.
Okay.
Aside from that, we actually broke a spindle on a tractor on the front wheel, and in theory it probably was already broken. But when we were moving hay around, getting that hay in, something bounced and it just
snapped off.
It didn't snap so badly that it damaged the tire, but that's just one more thing to repair now before the next cutting of hay starts. Fortunately, it looks like we've got a little bit of rain coming through every couple of days for the next
week at least.
Week or so, which is good for grass, harder for cutting hay. Fortunately, we're at a spot where we can afford to wait another week or two if we need to and let some more growth happen. So
okay, yeah, we're kind of waiting. We have a couple fields. We're gonna fertilize some, but we need to fertilize a little more. So our goal is to hopefully get out there this weekend between the rains and put down some more fertilizer on the as many hay fields as possible.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. I think this is a year where any hay you get up is going to have a lot of value. So we're working on all kinds of things. But the topic for today that we're going to do is tires. And this really came to me because when we drive posts, we use a skid steer to do it. And I am the person sitting in the skid steer watching the tires, making sure they're not rolling all over the place or bouncing. So that's my job, and really it's not a very exciting job, and it's I always get yelled at because I'm apparently not, I don't have the attention span for like sitting there completely focused on making sure
That tire does it.
the tire is exactly where it's supposed to be and nothing has moved and it doesn't try and turn and it doesn't try and roll. And the parking brake doesn't work well on the skid steer because it is older. So this is my job, and I don't have the attention span for 100% honest. So I spend a lot of time looking at these tires, and we made a decision a couple years ago to purchase for the skid steer a segmented solid tire because we were so tired of having tires go flat on a skid steer. It is one of the most frustrating things to have flat tires, and it is a almost comically regular part of farming is having a flat tire.
Yes, I mean we go to the tire store up there in Harrisburg almost all the time. They can tell Justin and I are twins, but I swear they can almost tell us apart. We go there.
I know.
It seemed like
that is how it feels for us too. They know us by name when we come in there, and I had a tire in there, a front tire off of a tractor the other day. I think I said that a couple weeks ago, and I brought it and put it in my car. And they're like, "Oh, it's just gassing off a little bit between the tube and the tire." And I was like, "Oh, I don't think this sounds very good." And then I had to bring it back the next business day to have them reset the tube and the tire because they had just missed whatever had caused it to go flat when they retubed the tire.
Okay.
But they didn't even ask my name or anything. They just took the tire back from me. Off they went with it. And that's because we spend a lot of time and money at the tire shop. And for anyone who's listening that has a farm, please just confirm for us that you also have issues with your tires, and it's not just Josh and I. Because
I used to go up there. I would just go up there, write my name on the tire, then just leave it. Sometimes if it was me taking up there, I'll be back. I don't know, maybe an hour or two later.
Yeah, sometimes an hour or two, sometimes the next day.
Yeah.
But sometimes you drop it off after hours. I don't even feel bad about dropping off a tire and leaving it outside, because if someone really wants my tire, it's okay. I don't typically bring up a whole vehicle at a time, which, good, bad, or otherwise, sometimes it changes the dynamic of how they get changed. But skid steer tires in particular, we've always been very susceptible to having them. And it's just a little bit, just the kind of turning that you do with a skid steer puts a lot of pressure, especially if there's a tube in the tire. Tubeless tires obviously are a little bit more robust, but the tubeless tires that you have, if you damage it, there's no repairing it, right? It's much more difficult to repair a tubeless tire.
And, we had just bought tires for our skid steer, so we actually went with the regular tires just because, we thought to ourselves, is the skid steer going to last long enough to, if we did get the tubeless tires.
Or solid tires.
Solid tires. Will our skid steer last long enough to even use it? So we wondered about that, and we wondered at some point, will we replace this? And so we went ahead, just like, we'll go with the regular. Hopefully we'll keep it in places where we shouldn't have an issue, but usually our issue is just, when it does happen, it definitely puts us in a bind. And so that's the thing. It just puts you in, it's that inconvenience, because it's a day that you're down.
Yeah, and I will say that for us, the skid steer, we made the decision to go with the solid tire. There's positives and negatives. One, I don't have flat tires. That's really good. The negative is a solid tire is not as comfortable.
Not as forgiving.
On rough dirt. It's really bumpy. I mean, not a skid steer is particularly comfortable to drive in anyway on rough dirt, but it's particularly difficult in a solid tire. But I don't tend to race mine at full bore all across the farm back and forth all the time. We don't tend to drive it a lot in that style. It's just not how we use our skid steer. So for us, that was an okay decision because we use it to scrape feed pads, to unroll hay occasionally.
And you get pretty good track because you had regular tires before. Do you get pretty good traction by comparison? Or
I get very good traction. The type of solid tire I have has an aggressive tread on it. And that was very intentional. We looked at also tracks as a thing that we might do. People have just straight track machines, and then they have people that have tracks that they put over top of their tires to get more strength and connection with the road in icy conditions or sort of wetter conditions. We put an aggressive treaded solid tire on, and actually it bites better than it did when we had the air-filled tires.
Okay.
So that was good. I know a number of people that have that do have tracked machines. And so if anyone's like really interested in it, a tracked machine by nature has a lot more contact with the ground. One, it gets better traction because of that. And
Yep.
two, it potentially has a little less aggressive impact, less digging.
Yeah, you have all that force is spread out over the pounds of force spread over a greater area.
Yeah, you have that bigger surface area that's in contact with the ground, and that can help. Where I will dig to China with my tires because they're aggressively treaded, but they're still a smaller tire. They're not a full tread, multiple feet of length. So
Yeah, we able to our neighbor, similarly, he was able to use his when we were out trying to dig posts this past December, and he was able to use his in areas where we could definitely not use our skid steer because he had tracks.
yeah, and I know some other people that feed in the winter and they use a skid steer to feed, and they have moved to tracks because it does make it a safer, more reliable option, especially in mud.
Yep.
Around here, we don't have the frozen weather, so we're not challenged with ice and snow in the same way that you would be in more northern climates. But that mud can, especially on a skid steer that has a very heavy back end, can
Yes.
just sink. So fortunately, we use ours mainly on concrete in the winter, so we haven't had that challenge with the mud quite so much. And I have enough traction and tread that I can get where I need to if it's kind of wet in spring or fall. I don't tend to take it out to do a lot of work in really wet areas in the wintertime. But we've actually gotten it out of spots that I would have expected it to get stuck just because we have pretty aggressive treads on those.
We've taken ours out in the field, but as you said, it's challenging, and sometimes there have been cases where we had to back up the hill and then also use the forks to help push us along. So
Yeah.
that's our worst case scenario, plan B. But that was the time we had to put hay out.
Yep.
And you have to do what you have to do sometimes. But ideally, if we had tracks, that would definitely make our job a lot easier.
Yeah. So if you were to recommend what someone should buy, what would you actually say to someone that was looking at tracks or air tires or solid tires?
So I'm gonna say, for me, it depends, and so it really depends on what and when you're going to be working. And so if you're going to be out there, you have to be in a lot of mud, or if you think you're going to be in a lot of mud, definitely go with the tracks. Alternatively, if we can, maybe design our structures and kind of similar to what you have, if we can design our structures, our feed areas, and everything else to be on rock or on relatively solid surfaces, sometimes that would be the way to go.
Yeah, and I think that the cost is also
The cost is a huge consideration.
Yeah, because the tires are going to be less expensive than the track, and the air-filled tires are less expensive than the solid tires. The benefit on the solid tires is you get a longer lifespan on them, and they don't go down.
They
And
don't go flat on you. And we take ours sometimes to hay fields. We'll take it to, if it's fairly dense. We'll take it different places to different farms as well. So they're fairly easy to transport either way. But I think sometimes I feel like the wheels just give us a little bit of flexibility and let us go where we need.
yeah, I think that's fair. The tires do give you more flexibility, I would think. Yeah, that's a fair point.
And so we our farm is spread out over a wider area, a couple different farms. So we do need to have that flexibility to go different places. I think if we have to, there's been times we've had to drive, and so even clear the road with the snow. So it's just it's worked both ways.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and so this is what we were primarily going to talk about the skid steer today, but how do you guys use tires on other things? So like for me, the one thing about the skid steer, I guess, I sort of started into this conversation, then I stepped back from it. The skid steer tires do not transfer to other pieces of equipment. We said before that I had a tire off of the front of a tractor, and I was able to put a wagon tire onto it, a larger wagon tire onto it, as a interim to keep the tractor functional until I got that tire replaced. That's the one thing I will say is like hay wagons, we get flats all the time. We have spares.
yes,
Tractors, front tires, we can usually figure out how to make something else work in the interim. Back tires on a tractor it's down.
You're just
it's
having
down.
A bad day.
It's a very bad day. and skid steer sort of similarly, if a tire is bad on a skid steer, it's just not replaceable until I get it replaced, and I have to take it to the tire shop and
get it done.
It's a process. It's a half day at least by the time all is said and done, probably at least a day that the the implements down. So for me, I have different priorities and different sensitivities to allowing maintenance wise. We talk a lot about maintenance versus
Preventive maintenance versus like your run to failure.
run to failure. and run to failure is a pretty common thing with tires. It's very rare that we don't run to failure, and it's not necessarily even that the tire's in bad condition. It's just the nature of having that many different tires on the roads, in the gravel, in the fields, all these different places that we just end up with flats.
Yeah, at some point I bought one of those magnets. I just had the kids walk around. I was like, go ahead and roll with this magnet on the string, and I'm surprised how much they find just in the gravel. And it's like, it must have been there for years and years and years. Like, I'm surprised we haven't had more surprisingly. But, it's something we try to plan for. We try to have, 4 lug, 6 lug, or 5, 6, 8 lug tires. Like, we have all of those in a bay where we just have those spare tires. We try to have at least one of each. And then definitely one for our, we use for the tractors. The 8 is for the tractors and our trailers.
Yeah.
We'll have a spare for that. So we have kind of all around spares. The one that's going to hurt us was whenever our big float tires, those bigger float tires on the baler are looking questionable, but they're pretty spendy.
Yes, those are spendy. You are correct. And yeah, we sort of like you. We also have a bunch of tires, and they're in different spots depending on where the trailers are, but they're sort of where we think we might need them. Hopefully they're close. And, the other thing is, because we sell hay, we deliver hay, we're pretty cognizant to make sure that we always have the right spare with us in the truck, depending on which trailer and stuff we're taking. And sometimes we have 2 spares with us, particularly with like the cattle trailer.
Right.
Because if you lost one tire on a cattle trailer, you might be able to replace it. If you lost a second one, if you have cows, you really don't want to leave them somewhere. So certain things we just have extra spares that we sometimes take with us if we have to go on a longer trip. Like when we picked up alpacas in March, it was a long drive. We made sure we had a significant number of spares, just because with animals in an animal trailer, you definitely don't want to be stuck on the side of the road and have to drop a trailer. So.
And we had experience last year. My brother Justin did. So what happened was, he's come back from Texas, had one tire blow out, and then the other tire on the same side blew out.
Oh wow!
And so he had one spare. And so the year before, he kind of had a similar issue. And so what he was able to do was he had this Dodge truck the year before, and that tire fit on the trailer. Well, apparently the 2011 Ford F350 tire, they've modified it just enough where it doesn't fit on the trailer. And so he was obviously unhappy. So this past year, he took 3 spares with him.
Yep.
He's like, I'm not doing that again. I was like, you don't take a whole spare. You might take almost 4 spares. You might as well. Might as well. Plan on having a bad day. But he was like, I'm traveling a large distance. I need to have an option.
Yeah, and I think that's very typical, that a lot of us that farm are always like, well, at least one tire's probably gonna go. So we just prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and that's sort of the reality on it. So
and plus, when you're traveling, you don't know where exactly you can get some of those heavy Class E, Class G trailer tires.
Exactly, those heavier duty tires, those 8-ply, 10-ply, those tires are much harder to find. Your local tire shop knows you, so they know you want, and sometimes they carry some of those in agricultural areas. But when you're traveling, it's not that they're not there, it's just that you don't know where to go to get them. Exactly.
You don't know where to go when you have a limping along with 3 wheels on a cattle trailer.
Exactly. So that is a challenge, but in general, I think for us at least, because we're not in crop fields, we don't have some of the challenges that crop farmers would have with like compaction. It doesn't mean that we're not concerned about it, but it doesn't tend to be the highest focus for us.
And compaction issues, that compaction can be somewhat air pressure, I think. And so that's if you increase air pressure in your tires as opposed to letting them go a little lower on your air pressure. Lower air pressure spreads out some of that forces, spreads out your tire, get a little more surface area, get a little less action.
Yeah, it's really interesting how people manage tires, especially people that are going in to plant, say, in early spring. They have a very different and very high priority on understanding how that compaction is going to affect their field Whereas for us, we're just like, maybe we can make it through the mud, and
Yeah,
we just accept that we're going to do some damage to our fields if we're out there in mud. It's a very different dynamic, I think, in the priorities based upon what we're doing.
yeah, because you get out there in February. I mean, you're really, when we used to have to feed through the field, you're driving through that field. You have dedicated lanes in which you pretty much rutted them up at least a foot or more. And so it's just a challenge sometimes. And you go for about another foot and a half, and you go over a foot and a half again. You go, so then you can really rut up the field. So almost it's better to plan ahead and try to figure out what is my sacrifice area. How can I easily and effectively put out my hay?
One thing I will say is that our rented farm, someone had been driving a 4-wheel drive tractor to feed, and they had ruts that were deep enough that I couldn't drive the 4-wheeler across it. And we have now, over 4 or 5 years, intentionally fed hay in that area, not when it's sopping wet, but when it's fairly wet, just to try and have the cattle walk back in those ditches. It is still miserable to drive over, but it's now drivable. But it's taken us intentionally feeding and unrolling hay and forcing some some balancing of those fields over time. It's actually pretty interesting to see sort of how those decisions are made on farms and how much damage those tires can really do if they're...
So there's been years we had to go through there and just disc.
Yep.
Pretty much disc, or take the skid steer and knock it down with the skid steer with the bucket. And you had to have some type of management strategy for that, and then go back in and just build some dirty fescue and hope for the best.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, the tires can make a major difference in how the farm performs afterwards, which is, not always something that we think about, especially on cattle operations.
And we think about, the other place we have problems with tires for us is the bush hog, because you're out there and you're mowing down essentially weeds and trees and at some
thorns.
So the thorns is what gets you a lot of times. And so you have air tires, which again, do you go cheapness, or and then we obviously have two replacements for those. Yes, we know at some point you're going to take down something that's going to make your tires flat.
Yeah, we bought a new bush hog rotary mower, or whatever term you want to use for it, a couple of years ago, and that was one of our considerations, was what kind of tires. The other one we have, the smaller one we have, has airplane tires on it, which are a very heavy ply inflatable tire. Also, if they do start to go flat, they still run.
Yeah.
They don't tend to go like completely flat, which is nice. This one has solid tires, so we've actually went with a solid tire on this one, just because we don't tend to drive them up and down the road a lot. We have hay wagons and other things that we drive a lot on the road. And it's not that the solid tires won't drive on the road, but we've been so happy with the solid tires on the skid steer that when we purchased the bush hog, we went ahead and purchased solid tires.
Yeah, you mentioned going down the road. So on our big 4-wheel drive tractor, we actually, in the summertime, turn our wheels around backwards, just so we can avoid some of the damage we're doing, so we don't tear up our tread as much.
That's a good point. Yeah, the road is much more challenging, and concrete in general is much more heavier wear and tear on tires than in a field. So you might make different decisions about what money you're willing to spend on tires if you're going to spend a lot of time traveling on concrete or roads versus if you're doing a lot of
in the field. You're not as concerned
through the field.
Not as concerned. So that was something else we had to consider as well. It's like, well, we'll go ahead and switch these. We think it does help preserve some of that tread.
Well, yeah, and we also, I don't know about you, we have probably more trailers than you do, so we tend to transport, if we're going more than like a mile, we tend to transport on a trailer, whereas I think you guys tend to drive them back and forth up and down the road a little bit more.
Yeah,
just from a convenience standpoint, the way your farm is set up.
It's just where everything's within probably as a crow flies 2 miles. It's for us to just up and down a little bit. So that is, there's lots of little things you got to consider when you're looking at your.
Yeah, it's a hard decision, and they're expensive. Like, that is a major part. Like, when we do our budget for the year, and I know you guys do your budget for the year, that's a big part of our maintenance and repair budget is tires.
Yeah.
And though when we went and made the decision on the skid steer a couple years ago to drop thousands of dollars to put in a solid tire instead of, thousands probably on top of what we would have spent on an air-filled tire, because it required different hubs, and it was a pretty expensive investment. But we looked at how much we were spending every year on repairing our tires, where we kept popping things. And we were like, can we justify it on a low enough hour machine? And we said yes. But similar to you, we did look at the hours on our machine before we made that decision, because the payback on it was not quick.
Oh no, that's probably.
And if it was only cost and it wasn't also time and frustration and driving to and from town to get the tire replaced and maybe having it down when we needed it, I'm not sure we could have done. Economically, I'm not sure it's the correct payout, but from a
down, you have a down machine, and when you need that to move hay, to get the hay in.
Exactly.
Look at potential losses. It does pencil out.
Yep. So that was our decision, and for anyone that's thinking about tires and are struggling with these decisions, just know you're not alone. It's a pretty common issue, at least for us on our farms, to make those decisions as well.
It is. It's paradoxical, because you got that cost and you got your functionality.
Yep.
You have to think about.
Okay, so let's end our talk of discussion of tires here. People are probably burnt out on tires for the day. And why don't you give me your biggest goals for next week on the farm?
Biggest goals for this upcoming week. Like I said, we have one tractor. We got it back, and we might have to send it back off because clutch wasn't working again. And so we just got it back and had it a week or so. So probably sending that one off. Then working on probably getting that fertilizer down. Getting that fertilizer down and out really quick. And then possibly moving cows and getting a wandering bull home.
That's important. Get that wandering bull home. Yeah, we have, I guess I hadn't even thought of it. Next week, we will be right around the 15th. So that will be time to pull out bulls for us. So that will be our goal, is probably to get bulls out. It might not be next week in the middle of the week. We might wait till the weekend to do it. I hadn't even thought about it. Thank you for reminding me. We are looking at the start of calving season, so we'll be moving to twice a day checks on our calving groups. We got to finish this fence that's down, and this is only a section of a pretty large, it's probably about 800 feet out of close to 2,000 feet of fence that we need to get done in total. But probably we have another 300 feet that we need to get done quickly.
Okay.
So we'll be working some more on fencing.
A fixed, not high tensile, or what?
This is a fixed, not high tensile. It's on a perimeter with a neighbor. He took charge of a bunch of the clearing. We left a few trees in the fence line, but in general, he took charge of the clearing, and we're sort of working on the fence just because it helps to have a system with people that you know. So
yes.
We have a system, and we're fencing. We actually, interestingly, we have someone that we've hired to do some fencing this summer, and we're doing some of our fencing ourselves this summer. And hopefully between the two, we will have a bunch of fence up when I come back next week and update, because that would be really nice to get a bunch of this knocked out.
Just knocked out. And 300 foot shouldn't be too bad.
No, a 300-foot section is not that bad. It's just that section's on a steeper hillside, and we didn't want to clear it with heavier equipment just from an erosion standpoint. And it doesn't have to be cleared quite as aggressively. Most of the trees are on the neighbor's property. We just need to clear enough to make sure we don't have stuff falling
on the fence.
On the fence itself. So we'll do some trimming, flat cuts, just to make sure everything is sort of back away from the fence.
All right.
So lots to handle, and you've inspired me. Maybe I'm going to look at fertilizer. I hadn't thought about putting any out this weekend, but maybe I'll be on the tractor on Saturday or Sunday.
If it's raining, keep talking to Matt Dixon. He says, "Oh yeah, we're going to get some rain." So if it keeps raining, hopefully we'll get some fertilizer out there and it'll do something.
Okay, with that, we'll end our conversation for today, and we'll be back next week with another podcast.
Everybody.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.